Okay. So once again, good morning. Welcome to the discussion for overview of cash and cash equivalents. Part 1 discussion for our Unit 1 cash and cash equivalents. So I hope some of you here who are mga bagong salta lang, you're a bit familiar with cash and cash equivalents. To proceed with our focus points or our objectives for this discussion is hopefully we can cover those 7 focus points, or let me just say 6 kasi yung sample problems we can have them later pag we proceed with problem solving. So we'll tackle the definition, recognition criteria, accounting measurement, financial statement presentation, adjustments to cash, at saka yung investment of excess cash. Now, let's start with definition. I know there are several definitions that are being provided to you by reference books. Several definitions, some of them almost memorized nyo na, or ako memorize ko na yung ibang definitions, but I on my part, I create my own definition for me for have a better understanding what is really cash and cash equivalent as per accounting. Okay? Our goal is to define each item in an accounting perspective. So for definition, let us start with cash. Okay? Cash is a financial asset. Always take note of that. It is a new term that is being incorporated for the concept of cash. Cash is a financial asset as per provided by PAS 32. 32 provides that a financial asset is any asset that is cash. So therefore, vice versa, cash is a financial asset, and the financial asset is an example of it is cash. Right? That represents primary component of a company's financial or capital structure. Right? That is unrestricted as to use. It is true that it is a primary component of a financial and at the same time the capital structure of a company, because in one way or another, a company cannot thrive without cash, or a business cannot start or continue without cash. Okay? The most important term that we're going to associate with cash in relation to its actual accounting is being unrestricted. Right? Imagine you are in your daily life, in the daily basis. When you purchase something, when you buy something from a store, from sari-sari store, we always look for a cash that is available. Okay? If the cash is somewhat kept or set aside for a certain purpose, sometimes we parang nag-aalangan tayo to use that cash. Okay? In accounting, it is somewhat the same perspective. If the cash is available, immediately available or accessible or unrestricted, we use that cash, and in accounting, we qualify that item as part of the cash. But otherwise, if it is restricted or set aside for a very strict purpose, we do not use that cash. That is for accounting. Okay? A kindly raise hand if nahahabol ako doon. Ayan. Thank you kung nahabol. Now, based on that definition that I have provided to you, what are we really defining is not the term cash, but the account cash. In accounting, we are after also how do we define that account? What is something that should be associated with that account, and how do we qualify that account? So cash account, yan yung definition. The items that would be included for the cash account should be those items that are immediately accessible. Okay? Unrestricted cash. Cash in accounting should be unrestricted. So therefore, based on the definition, we can also say that there are cash items that are restricted, in the sense that they cannot be qualified as part of the cash account. Now in accounting, Cash includes cash on hand, cash in banks, and cash funds. When we say cash on hand, literally it is the cash on the possession of the company. When we account for cash, we look for those cash that are in the possession of a company. Tawag dyan, cash on hand. While cash in banks, by the name itself, it's literally deposited in banks. Those money that collections and other cash or money that is presented for deposit dun sa bank. Examples are we have the demand deposits. When we say demand deposits, those accounts that can be accessed anytime. The cash that had been deposited in those accounts can be immediately withdrawn for immediate trading purpose. Okay? Then cash funds depends if it is in the possession of the entity itself or deposited in the banks. The idea of cash fund is that it is set aside for certain purpose. But in order for a cash fund to be part of the cash account, it must be immediately accessible. Immediately accessible. Sir, does cash fund, because cash fund is set aside for a certain purpose, does it violate the being unrestricted? In one way or another, hindi. As long as it is part of the primary and current operation of an entity. Right? So examples of items of cash on hand, cash in banks, and cash funds, we have it there. For cash on hand, we have cash collections, treasury warrants, money orders, customers' checks, travelers' checks, and managers' checks. Now, going back with our definition earlier, with cash, I forgot to mention that cash in accounting is not literally only means the coins and bills that we know. Sometimes we interchangeably use cash with the term money. Although cash is really money, it really talks about money, and cash is really money, cash doesn't only mean the literal coins and bills that we know. When we say cash, it is we should associate cash as a value, a value that we're going to include in the cash account. So for example, cash collections may really pertain for coins and bills that we receive from customers. Okay? But treasury warrants, money orders, and checks, they do not pertain to the literal coins and bills, but they do pertain to the value of cash. Right? Kindly raise hand if nahabol ako doon. Yan. Okay? Sometimes in the reference books, it is not being emphasized that cash, that the way that cash should be defined is not the literal na money only, the coins and bills only. In fact, we define cash as it includes all other that can be converted into cash or already cash, equal to cash. Not just an equivalent, but equal to cash na. Okay? Cash collections, then next, treasury warrants. When we say treasury warrants, if you're going to search in the internet, treasury warrants is defined as an instrument being used by the government for its disbursement. It is an instrument for disbursement of a government offices. Other companies, especially in the treasury section, may also issue treasury warrants. Treasury warrants are actually certificates that provides for certainty of payment. By the term itself, warrants. It warrants for payment. So immediately accessible din yan. Money orders are actually an order instrument for payment of something, a certain amount, which is parang similar yung kanyang application sa treasury warrant. Magkaiba nga lang yung how they are recorded, how they are created, parang ganyan. Then checks, customers checks, travelers checks, and managers checks. For cash, in the law, check is not a legal medium of exchange as in compare with cash. It's not a legal tender. When we say legal tender, you can refuse to accept check when you want cash. However, nowadays, check is more convenient in contrast with uh, carrying cash. So you can observe yung mga transactions ngayon, they are ano usually cashless. So check is an example of an application that is cashless. Yung literal na nagdadala talaga tayo ng cash. Aside from online transactions. It's a different story for online transactions. Now for checks, always take note that to be unrestricted, to be immediately accessible, a check must be tawag doon, demandable demandable and presentable for encashment. Okay, they are readily encashable. What does it mean? When we receive check today, when we present it in the bank can immediately encash that check. There is no other restriction that is imposed within that check. So, though check may be qualified as cash, there are certain conditions that we're going to consider later on in our discussion, especially when we proceed with adjustments to cash. There are restrictions kasi with checks, especially if they bears a different date, okay, something like that. But if the problem provides in the problem solving, if the problem provides no information, they only provide for the amount of the check, the equivalent amount of the check, but no other information regarding that check, then that check is part of cash. Otherwise, not part of cash if there are restrictions. Yun lang naman. Okay? Now, for cash in banks, we have demand deposit. Examples of demand deposit, nandiyan yung savings and checking accounts. I know you are familiar with savings because in one way or another, you have savings na. I don't know with account. Savings meron. Hindi nga rin kami sure sir kung merong savings. Okay. So in a company, meron din silang tinatawag na savings and checking accounts. When we say savings, literally for safekeeping of the money in those banks and other financial institutions and banking institutions. For checking accounts, it is a different story. In contrast with savings. As you see checking, by the way, kindly raise hand if any one of you here able to see in person. Nakita na ng cheque. Literal na check, guys. Wow. So at a young age, nakita na kayo ng check. Good thing for you. Okay? Now, when an entity issues a check, what now? Anong gagawin natin dyan sa check na yan? Diba? Sometimes yung teller will ask you if you will encash that check in the bank or you will encash it within the teller. Pwedeng ganon. Okay? But usually, the purpose of the check is security purposes. When we receive check, in order for the check to be converted into cash, what we do or an entity do is to present it to the bank for encashment. Where that check is being charged against is called a checking account. Checking account, sometimes it is referred to as a drafting account. Doon charge yung mga cheque. Okay? Kindly raise hand if nahabol ako doon. Sige. Thank you for that. Then next, we have cash funds. Now, cash funds, these are items of cash that have been set aside for certain purpose. Now, being part of cash funds will depend on its usage or nature. Okay? Now, what you have encountered in your FAB-M subject during your senior high school days you have their petty cash fund, right? You're familiar with petty cash fund? Kindly raise hand if familiar. Okay. So, most of you are familiar with petty cash fund. Now, petty cash fund, it is set aside for meeting obligations for small expenses. Example, you are just paying for 100 peso gasoline or 100 peso transportation. The use or the purpose of establishing a petty cash fund is for uh, paying small expenses that are not conveniently paid through check. Sometimes it is already unusual for an entity to issue check for just 100. Inconvenient na yan. Usually, checks are being issued for 1,000 above. Okay lang yan. But for a small expense, petty cash fund will be used. What is being provided, documents that are being provided in relation with petty cash fund are vouchers, no longer checks. Next is we have payroll fund. Payroll fund is a general account related to crediting salaries and wages. I hope you are familiar with the difference of salary and wage. A salary, fixed yan, usually fixed, while wage, variable. They vary in sectoral, ang tawag doon. Basta there is a table. It differs also in per region. Yun yung wage. I'm not sure if how much is the minimum wage already in here in Region 8. Kaya di na ako updated eh. Okay? But yan, yung payroll. So payroll is set aside for paying salaries and wages. Now, if it is set aside, that means it is restricted. No. It's still unrestricted because a business, take note, payment of salaries and wages is essential for a business. We pay salaries to our employees. So for business purpose, primary business purpose. Okay? Next, we have interest fund. When we say interest fund, sometimes an entity is borrowing funds from banking institutions. Now that borrowings or that loan, it is associated with finance cost. That finance cost being the interest. So there is an adjunct liability aside from the loan. So what are you paying actually when you have a loan is not just the principal amount of the loan itself, but also interest. Sometimes the principal amount of the loan is payable at a specific date in lump or in one-time payment, but in contrast to that, interest is in periodic payment. That is why entities provide for a separate fund for that in order not to disrupt other funds. Okay? So payment of interest are usually, if an entity really establish a separate fund for that interest, will get fund for payment in the interest fund. So usually, payment are in a periodic basis. Then we have tax fund. Tax fund, alam nyo na, hindi papahuli ang government in the collection of taxes. Business regularly pay taxes in taxing authorities like sa BIR, the most common ay taxing authorities. We paid several types of taxes. We have value-added tax, we have income taxes, we have final taxes, we have capital gains taxes, and all the taxes. Okay? So, part of business operation. Next, we have dividend fund. Let me recall if you can still remember. Remember na ba yan? Okay. Recall the topic corporation. You can still remember the topic in the corporation. What type of topic, sir? Tawag nito? Shareholders. Kindly raise hand. Can still remember shareholders in their FINAC. Ayan. Can still remember. Okay? Now, shareholders, they are owners of an entity. Correct. They are owners of an entity, of a corporation, especially of a stock corporation. The owners of a stock corporation are called share or stockholders. As an owner of an entity, of a corporation, you have an investment in that entity. Now, having an investment, syempre, you are expecting in return. Diba? There are no one in their lucid mind will invest into something or in a business na without an expectation for a return. Diba? Na-gets? Now, as a shareholder, probably the most return that you're expecting at least is dividend. Okay? So a corporation may issue a dividend, and in order not to disrupt other fund, they establish a separate fund for paying dividends. But then again, based on your corporation, it is up to the corporation through the board of the directors if they are going to declare dividends. But if they do, they get the fund from the dividend fund. If they have dividend fund. Right? Next, business travel fund. For problem-solving purposes, sometimes what is provided in the textbooks are travel fund. Now, if there are no other information for travel fund and it really relates for a business, then travel fund is automatically part of cash. Now, what is the gist when it comes to travel fund? Also, the same with traveler's check. They must be for business purpose. Example of business purpose, annual meetings of owners. Another is team building, seminars of the owners. Yan. They are for business purpose. But if they are only for personal purpose of the owners, then that travel fund or traveler's checks cannot be part of the cash and cannot be part of the accounting of the entity. Okay? So that's some of the examples of cash items. In practice, there are some other cash items pa. Okay? Now, let's proceed with cash equivalents. Now, you might be thinking, why did we not include immediately the definition of cash equivalent to sa cash? They have different definition actually. Okay? Cash equivalents, why is it that those items, if you have already run through reference books and the discussion material, maybe you have questioned yourself, why is it that there is cash equivalent? Bakit there is a suffix na equivalence? Why not part of cash immediately? Okay? Cash equivalents are of different nature, somehow in contrast with cash. But for financial statement purposes, they are combined in total. They are part in a one-line item, cash and cash equivalent. Okay? Past 7, paragraph 6 to 7 provides for the definition of cash equivalents as short-term, highly liquid investments. By that alone, cash equivalents are not yet cash because of being investment. Okay? As we have defined earlier, cash, they must be restricted. And literally, they must be in the form of cash and any that are equal to cash already. Cash equivalents are not that equal to cash, though they are equivalent. So parang ang gulo. Okay? So let me proceed with the definition for you to understand more why cash equivalent. Cash equivalent, they are investment. Though they are not equal yet to the definition of cash, They are equivalent to cash because they are readily convertible to known amounts of cash. Kaya nga equivalent pa lang. Hindi pa equal, equivalent lang. Parang ang gulo, sir. Okay. Which have short maturity of, say, 3 months or less from date of acquisition. Very important ang definition natin with cash equivalent. Why? Because there are other arguments that you are going to encounter in some textbooks with regards to cash equivalents. Okay? Past 7 provides for that definition, but past 7 did not broaden enough. What does it really mean with that definition? Yes, cash equivalents are investment, kaya hindi siya qualified agad as part of the cash account. A cash account. Cash and cash equivalent are different accounts, although they are combined in one line item in the financial statement. Further, based na rin doon sa definition, we're going to expound more doon sa definition ng cash equivalent. We're going to consider the interpretation of the Philippine Interpretations Committee when it comes to past 7, paragraph 6 to 7. Cash equivalents are not cash, do not meet the definition of cash because they are mere investment. But they are not mere investment na for other purpose. Okay, I will stress this out or emphasize this out. They are in substance investment. What does it mean but not as mere investment and other purpose? When we say kasi investment, okay, what is your understanding with investment? Tanungin ko muna kayo, what is your understanding when it comes to the term investment? Ilagay niyo sa chat box yung mga terminologies na pwede niyo i-associate with the term investment. Sige nga, what comes into your mind when you hear the word investment? Anak ko, parang naguguluhan. Funding. Okay. Any other? Parang good, okay naman yung ano nyo, yung association. Lend money, pwede rin for future interest from it. Okay, parang may nakakuha na ng ano, may nakakuha na ng malapit-lapit na term. Okay. Sabi ni Miss Rhea, long-term savings. Yan. I will set aside the term savings. I will go with long-term. Usually, when we say investment, we are putting our money for that in the long run or in the long term. But how can we reconcile it with cash equivalents? Kasi kanina sabi highly liquid investment. Tapos sabi ng PIC ngayon, they are not as mere investment and other purpose. Now, to reconcile that one, yes, they are investment, but they are not the investment for long-term and other purpose. Okay? The reason why we acquire and hold that cash equivalent, that highly liquid investment, is for short-term cash commitment. Yun yung ibig sabihin ng highly liquid investment for cash equivalents. Okay? Doon tinatarget sa purpose na yun, short-term cash commitment. Okay? Kindly raise hand if nahabol ako doon. Yan. Okay? So yan ha, always take note. First ano ng PIC interpretation, first consideration natin dyan, cash equivalents are held for short-term cash commitments. Okay? Now, another thing is something na medyo mahirap intindihin for one-time reading. Okay. Other than being for short-term cash commitments, PIC or Philippine Interpretations Committee provides further na if we're going to stick lang naman if you're going to strictly stick on the definition of the cash equivalent, ayan, eto, books and other references emphasize na yan lang talaga yung qualifications natin, yung criteria natin for cash equivalence. Okay? When we characterize or categorize an item to qualify as cash equivalent, what we do is usually bumalik tayo sa definition. We go back to the definition. Okay? Books emphasize na dapat yan lang daw. Dapat yan lang daw. However, Philippine Interpretations Committee provides that items, cash equivalents are also items that are proven with strong evidence and substance as cash equivalents. What does it mean? Although they do not meet the entire, if we can set aside, I'm not saying entire, parang disregard that. What I'm saying is, if we can temporarily set aside yung para mag-deviate ng konti dun sa definition ng cash equivalent, if daw with strong evidence and in substance na cash equivalent siya, okay? Kasi pag sinabi natin cash equivalent, automatic short term yan eh. Automatic highly liquid investment yan eh. Yung talagang titignan na lang natin na meron tayong usual na argument is sa short maturity na 3 months or less. Okay? So going back with number 2, kahit hindi ma-meet dun yung short maturity na yun, as long as in substance cash equivalent siya, we qualify that item as cash equivalent. Okay? We qualify that item as cash equivalent. Sir, what about for sample problem solving? What about for problem solving purposes in the reference books? How do we deal with that? Because problem solving in reference books will not further provide you any information with those cash equivalents aside from the qualifications that we have based on the definition that was provided. Okay? In fact, PAS 7 did not provide further what does it mean by short term. Who can still recall in FINAC under PAS 1 the definition of current? Okay? Kindly raise hand if you can still remember what does it mean by being current. Okay? Can still remember? So marami. So, sige, tatawag ako. Diyan lang. Nagbabaan agad ng kamay kung sabi ko tatawag ako. Kaya talaga. So, sige. Anong sabi ng PAS 1? When it comes to being current. O sabi naman natin being short term because short term could mean current. An item of asset or liability is considered as current if it is realizable or due. Realizable when it comes to asset or due when it comes to liability within 1 year or within the operating cycle of an entity, whichever is shorter or longer. Excuse me. Ano yung sabi ng PAS 1? Shorter or longer? Di ba sabi doon, within 1 year or within the company's operating cycle or normal operating cycle, whichever is shorter or longer. Nahahati ang madla. O sabi ni Miriam, within 12 months. Ayaw niya ng 1 year. Ayaw niya ng 1 year. 12 months ang gusto niya. Correct naman yung 12 months. Okay, so parang nahati. What is provided in PAS 1 is longer. Longer dapat. Because there are other operating cycles that are longer than 12 months or 1 year. Okay, so ano ibig sabihin yan? An asset is considered long-term if realizable within 1 year. Automatic yan, current. What if the operating cycle of an entity is more than 1 year? 1 year is equivalent to 365 or 66 days. Diba? Depende if leap year. Now, how about operating cycle? Some entities may have 400 days operating cycle or sometimes may have shorter operating cycle. Okay? Kung lagpas ng 1 year, tignan mo muna yung operating cycle ng entity. If the operating cycle of the entity is 400 days, therefore, that item, though realizable more than 1 year na, but still within the operating cycle, still considered as current. Okay? Did you understand? Nahabol? Kindly raise hand. Why am I asking you this? Kasi nga, very important yung basic concept natin doon sa Baaksen, doon sa FINAC, lalo na sa mga current and current na yan, here also in the specific accounts na in intermediate accounting. Okay? Kailangan medyo meron tayong foundation, great foundation to that. So yan ha, I hope na nag-gets niyo yan. Now, balik tayo kay cash equivalent. Now, short term is not expounded ng PAS 7 because within 1 year or within the operating cycle of an entity, it could still be considered as short term. Okay? It could still be current. Now, sabi ng PAS 7, balikan natin yung definition ng cash equivalent. Sabi ng PAS 7, sabi lang niya dito, short maturity of, say, 3 months or less from the date of acquisition. Ang ibig sabihin, if I acquire or pag nag-purchase ako ng cash equivalent today, ano yon, November 24, I will count from today up to the maturity of that investment. Pagpasok daw, say 3 months or less, sabi niya ha, say 3 months or less, cash equivalent na daw. However, there are arguments against that. What about more than 4 months? What about more than 6 months? They are still short term. In fact, they can still be highly liquid. Nagigets ako guys. Kindly raise hand if nagigets yung argument na yan. Okay. I really hope you are really questioning your mind like that. Okay? Before, hindi ko yan na-emphasize sa mga sa mga students ko in the previous semesters. Hindi ko na-emphasize masyado. Okay? Sabi lang dyan ng tawag nito, ng PAS 7, say 3 months or less. Parang if we're going to translate it in Tagalog, parang sinasabi niya, cash equivalent siya, kung meron siyang maturity, sabihin na lang natin 3 months or less. Pasok siya sa 3 months or less. 3 or hindi, basta 3, hanggang 3 buwan, parang ganon. Okay? But the argument, how about those 4 months, 6 months, short term din naman sila eh. Diba? But if we're going to stick on that definition of paragraph 6 to 7, we can qualify an item of cash equivalent as cash equivalent if we are going to consider yung number 1. Okay? Anong sabi again ng number 1? Held for meeting short-term cash commitments. Because in practice, yung usual na short-term commitment, pasok yung 3 months or less. Okay? Pasok yung 3 months or less na yan. But what about si number 2? What about si number 2? How do we reconcile number 2 with the definition provided by past 7? Okay? Yung magiging reconciliation natin dyan is being with strong evidence, proven with strong evidence, and in substance, cash equivalent. Ibig sabihin, if medyo nag-deviate from the definition of a cash equivalent, especially on the short maturity niya, ay na 3 months or less, kahit siya hindi short, merong short maturity na 3 months or less, as long as cash equivalent siya, okay, strong evidence and in substance treated as cash equivalent, we qualify such item as cash equivalent. Now, examples of those items, we have treasury bills, certificate of time deposit or certificate of deposit, or minsan time deposit lang. We have commercial papers, we have short-term government bonds, and we have shares with redemption value. Okay? Now, yung certificate of time deposit, actually, they are in the form of bank deposit. Okay? By the name itself, time deposit, it requires time before it matures. Now, sir, you have told us time deposit, they are in the form of bank accounts. Really, they are deposited in the banks. But why is it that they are part of cash equivalent? Not part of cash, immediately part of cash. Kasi nga, nasa bangko yan. Are you getting my point? Kindly raise hand kung nagiget yung point. Diba? Come to think of it, if you're going to search sa internet, time deposit are deposit. They're in the bank, literally. But why is it that hindi sila part of cash? Diba sa cash kanina, meron tayong cash in bank. Here in cash equivalent, meron naman tayong time deposit. But why is it cash equivalent siya, hindi siya cash in bank? Hindi siya cash. Hindi siya pinasok as part of cash agad. Ba't ganon? In contrast with cash in banks, the cash in bank that we are referring earlier are demand deposit. Pag demand deposit, wala po yang maturity period. Si time deposit, meron. By the name itself, a time deposit, it already denotes na meron siyang maturity. We need to wait some time before it matures. Yun yung time deposit. Okay. Commercial papers, we have yung mga money market instruments or money market placements. Then for short-term government bonds, they are government instruments na ini-issue ng ng government for additional funding. They are investment on the part of the purchaser or ng holder or yung investor itself. If an entity acquire a short-term bond from the government, asset yan dun sa nag-purchase na entity. Then shares with redemption value. Emphasis on redemption value. And also emphasis na rin sa shares. Who can still remember the classes of shares sa FINAC? Kindly raise hand. Sir, nasa intermediate accounting na tayo. Bakit pinapaalala pa sa amin yung nasa FINAC? Wala lang, gusto ko lang paalala sa inyo. Kasi sa accounting lang, yung past na need mong alalahanin. Char. Ihugot. Kidding aside, guys, kasi remember the classes of shares sa corporation. O, pakonti-konting nakakaalala. Sige, type na lang sa chat box. What are the classes of shares na alam nyo? Sige, clue. Dalawa lang yon, dalawa lang. What are those? 2 classes of shares. Correct. O, naaalala naman pala Yan. Very good. Naalala naman pala. Preference shares or preferred shares and ordinary or common shares. Very good. Naalala pa ng iba. Sana all, naalala pa. Okay. Yan. Between star. Between preference share and ordinary share, yung usual share na merong redemption value is the preference shares. Now, ito yung gist. Pag nakita nyo sa mga problem solving, actually there is a reference book na nagpo-provide na preference shares with redemption period, they are as if they qualify in the definition of cash equivalent, they are part of cash equivalent. They can qualify as cash equivalent. So pag nakita nyo sa problem solving, nakita kayo ng preference share investment, take note ha, investment, meaning asset side, asset perspective, na yung preference share na yan, there is a redemption period. Okay? You can redeem that preference share. Minsan yung terminology na ilalagay sa problem solving is redeemable preference share. Kasi usually preference share naman yung may redemption period. Yung pwedeng i-redeem. Okay? That means, tignan nyo kung pwede siyang maging cash equivalent. If pwede, then we can say na part of cash equivalent yung preference share investment. Ayan. Okay? Some other books, I'm not sure if they emphasize that one. But Philippine Interpretations Committee provides for such. Okay? Provides for such shares with redemption value or any assets or investments with redemption value, okay, including na yung shares, they can qualify as cash equivalent as long as they meet short-term cash commitment purpose and if they are proven with strong evidence and in substance na sila ay cash equivalent. Okay? So that's it. Ang ilang slide pa lang to. Oh my gosh. Ang 8 slide pa lang pala. Mababang usapan pa kami. Okay. Notes to consider for cash equivalents. Now, what we are arguing talaga. What we are discussing earlier is that cash equivalents are not yet cash. Okay? All the arguments that we are tackling earlier, that cash equivalents are not yet cash, meaning they do not meet yet the qualifications of cash or the definition of cash because they do not satisfy the criteria of being unrestricted. Okay? Very specific kasi yung cash for being unrestricted. Pag immediately accessible yan, okay, pwede kong gamitin agad, cash yan. But for cash equivalent, hindi siya cash kasi na-defeat yung criteria na unrestricted. We do not cash equivalents do not satisfy the unrestricted criteria. Because of its maturity, because of its short maturity, somehow, hindi ko sinasabing restricted talaga totally. Somehow, I will just emphasize somehow. Somehow restricted because of that maturity. Kasi kung walang maturity, yun, cash na talaga agad yan. But because of that maturity, medyo somehow pa, restricted siya. So yan. They are nearly cash because of yung suffix na equivalence. Ibig sabihin lang, they are nearly cash because of the criteria na readily convertible. They are not readily accessible or immediately accessible. They are not yet unrestricted, but because of their short maturity, they are readily convertible. Okay? Readily convertible. Iba kasi yung readily convertible sa immediately converted. Cash is immediately converted. But cash equivalents, convertible. Take note of the terms. Immediately converted or converted versus convertible. Yung converted talaga na-convert na. Convertible, ikaw convert pa lang. Kindly raise hand if nagets yon. Okay. Now, ano rin ang mahirap dito sa accounting? Guys, believe it or not, take it from me. One thing that kalaban ng mga BSA student, the mortal enemy of a BSA student is the English, the grammar in accounting. Kaya nga again, the reason why bakit kayo tinanong in the orientation, bakit kayo nag-accountancy, kayo nag-BSA, which is natawa lang talaga ako sa mga comments niyo. Kasi I want to know what is your perspective with the course or the program. Kasi minsan, pag BSA ka, it is a wrong notion na palagi sinasabi ng mga tao na you are good at math. No. In fact, we're not good at math. Reason, we use calculators. We use mostly simple operations. Add, minus, subtract, divide, yun lang. But what BSA or accountancy program stands out is because also of analysis. Okay? Meaning, you are good at comprehension. Being good at comprehension, dapat medyo marunong tayo mag-balance ng mga terminologies. We also need to be careful of the terminologies. Ay patalastas lang yon. Okay, patalastas lang yun. So next, moving on. Equity investments and other investments which do not have maturity date are not cash equivalents. Yan. Talagang sinabi yan ng Philippine Interpretations Committee and also with PAS 7. Equity investments and other investment which is in fact wala naman talagang maturity date yan. Okay, yung equity investment, particularly equity investment. Example of an equity investment na walang maturity date is the investment in ordinary share. Usually, yung ordinary share or common share investment, wala talaga yung maturity. Okay, maturity date. Okay? Sabi doon sa PIC, equity and other investment which do not have maturity date are not qualified as cash equivalents. Period. Tapos mayroon pang may period tapos mayroong dugtong. Okay? Unless daw that investments are proven again and in substance are cash equivalents. So ganito na lang, isipin natin. For cash equivalents, always take note, generally dapat merong short maturity. Okay? So automatic, pag may short maturity, we can qualify as cash equivalent. Pero take note, titignan pa rin natin in problem solving, for problem solving purposes, any other information that will hint us, though it has maturity, we're going to qualify that cash equivalent as to either really a cash equivalent or not. But for other information or other items, another considerations, additional informations, if those items, though they are equity and other investment, though they do not have maturity date, if stated na in substance they are cash equivalents, then no more argument. Qualify them as a cash equivalent. Okay? So I hope na I am clearly understood on that part. Okay? Sige, Kembo. Next, we have the recognition criteria. Okay? Now that we know the examples of cash, the definition of cash, the examples of cash equivalents, the definition of cash equivalents, this time, how do we recognize? What are those criteria that we need? Okay? We need for accounting for that cash and cash equivalent items. Okay. Notes to consider when recognizing cash equivalents, cash and cash equivalents. There is no specific accounting or reporting standard that is very much specific on the accounting for cash equivalents. Earlier, past 7, which provides for the definition of cash equivalent, it only provides for definition and other available recognition criteria, but not the entire accounting. In fact, past 7 is entitled Statement of Cash Flows. The title of past 7 is Statement of Cash Flows, hindi cash and cash equivalent. Okay? Hindi cash and cash equivalent. So yung past 7, hindi yan standard for the specific and entire accounting ng cash and cash equivalent. Though it provides definition ng cash and cash equivalent and available recognition criteria. Okay? So starting with cash. We recognize cash if it meets the definition, generally being unrestricted. So babalik ulit tayo dun sa definition. Relate sa definition. Kailangan unrestricted. Or kailangan readily available. Or kailangan immediately accessible. Okay, immediately accessible. Now, under Philippine Interpretations Committee, talaga sabi doon, dapat unrestricted. But there are cash items that with restrictions that are restricted, but those restrictions does not prevent such items from being used for trading purpose. Okay? For normal business purpose. Okay? Kapag ganyan, if the nature of the restriction does not really restrict that cash, that item from being part of cash, then we can qualify that item as cash. So parang naguguluhan kami sa PI's interpretation. Ano ibig sabihin yan? Example, if an entity, tawag nito, borrowed fund. Borrowed funds from banking institutions, from the bank. Sabihin na lang natin nag-loan, umutang kay bank. Diba? Usually, when an entity borrowed funds from the bank, meron niyang tinatawag na loan contract. A loan contract is a legal and a formal contract, meaning it really includes formalities. Formalities na yon are conditions. Conditions, restrictions, yan. Yun naman talaga usual in the practice. Now, how do we reconcile the Philippine Interpretations Committee na provision nila na restricted tapos can still qualify as part of cash? Now, yung restrictions minsan dun sa loan meron. May mga conditions ganyan, but the amount of cash that we receive, okay, kaya nga nagbabaro tayo ng fund from the bank is for us to have something to use for our business. Now, that cash that are being used for business purpose is part of cash. Can in fact qualify as part of cash. Nagigets ba guys? Nagigets? Kindly raise hand if nagigets yun. Okay? What do I mean by that? Siyempre nangutang ka eh. Tagalog ko na lang. Siyempre nangutang ka. Nangutang yung entity dun sa bank. Ano yung purpose ng pangutang? Siyempre para sa business purpose, normal trading activities natin. We are borrowing funds kasi nga, sabi lang natin, we are short of funds, we are short of cash, we borrow funds for us to have something to revolve. Okay? Para meron tayong paggamitan. So if that restrictions through the contract restrict us from using that cash, then hindi natin yan gagawing part ng cash natin kung restricted talaga. E anong kwenta ng ating pagborrow ng fund kung gano'n? Okay? I hope nagigets ako dyan. Another example is compensating balance or yung maintaining balance. Who among you here are familiar with minimum balance? Or sino dito yung merong bank accounts o yung parents nila or yung relatives nila or mga kapatid, ganyan, merong bank accounts tapos yung bank account na yun merong minimum balance. Ayan. Okay. Ayan. Question, what is the purpose of that maintaining balance? Diba, if you enroll an account, okay, in a bank, usually sa orientation, kung merong orientation with that teller, sinasabihan kayo, sir, ma'am, sir, for your account not to be closed, you have to maintain this amount as maintaining balance, as minimum balance. That's another example ng concept ng sinasabi ng PIC na maintaining balance in itself is restricted. Diba? Now, restricted talaga in the nature na dapat hindi natin i-withdraw in order for us or in order for the account not to be closed. But the question is, pwede ba natin i-withdraw yung minimum balance? Can we withdraw maintaining balance? Yes or no lang sa chat box. Are we allowed to withdraw that minimum balance? Okay. Majority said yes. I'll take that. I'll accept that. But I will also accept for those who will say no. Ang gulo mo, sir. Actually, it depends. Pwede nating i-withdraw, pwede hindi. But yes, we can withdraw. Okay? Pwedeng hindi rin, pwedeng oo. Depende na rin yan sa nature ng condition na nasa contract. Natawa ako. Sabi, kung wala ka na talaga pera, withdraw na lahat, sir. Very good, very good. Sabi ni Joanna, kung wala na daw pera, i-withdraw lahat. Totoo naman. Okay. Totoo naman talaga yan. Now, going back. Yun nga. We can withdraw. Sometimes an entity can withdraw yung minimum balance na yan. But because, yun nga, yung purpose ng maintaining balance is for that account to thrive na hindi siya talaga ma-close. Okay? Yung ginagawa talaga natin is not to withdraw that cash. Okay? But yes, it's up to us to withdraw. Okay? Nai-gets ba? Kindly raise hand. Nai-gets ako? Okay. So thank you for that. So moving on. With cash equivalents. Sa cash equivalents naman, how do you recognize items of cash equivalents? Balikan lang natin yung definition provided by PAS 7. Generally, kailangan short term. Generally, kailangan highly liquid investment. Then generally, based na dun sa definition, we can say, pagpasok sa 3-month maturity from acquisition date, generally cash equivalent na yan. Exception to the rule again, as provided by Philippine Interpretations Committee. Sabi doon, other items of deposit or investments that meet the following criteria can qualify as cash equivalent. Example, first, insignificant risk of changes in value. Anong ibig sabihin ng insignificant risk of changes in value? Actually, yung nandun talaga sa past 7, sa definition ng cash equivalents. Cash equivalents are short-term, highly liquid investments, readily convertible to known amounts of cash that are subject to insignificant risk of changes in value with short maturity of, say, 3 months or less from the date of acquisition. Oh my gosh, memorize ko pang definition. Yun. Yung sabi doon is subject to insignificant risk of changes in value. Pag sinabi natin insignificant risk, take note ha, insignificant, meaning not significant. Insignificant risk of changes in value, meaning the market rates or the market factors does not affect, or does not, tawag nito, ano yung term? Does not provide for the fluctuation of the value of that cash equivalent or that investment in the market. So sa madaling sabi, hindi nag-fluctuate ang value or hindi nag-change, halos hindi nag-change yung value ng cash equivalent natin. Yun yung ibig sabihin ng insignificant risk of changes in value. Then another is yung most common short-term cash commitment. Okay? As long as an item of cash equivalent is for short-term cash commitment, okay? Ibig sabihin, in substance talaga, they are cash equivalent, then they recognize that as cash equivalent. Ayan ha, yan yung ating recognition criteria kanina for cash. Then, this time for cash equivalents. Now, after recognizing, how do we measure this time? Yun yung magiging question naman natin. Na-recognize na natin yung item na pwede siyang cash equivalent. Now, this time, how do we measure? Usually naman, recognition and measurement come hand in hand. Okay? Pero sineparate ko lang para mas understandable. How do we measure cash and cash equivalents? Sabi sa mga reference books, may specific sila doon eh. Pero ako, okay, hindi to masyado na-emphasize sa ibang reference books. Yung talagang measurement ng cash and cash equivalents is yung naka-bold. Sabi dyan, items of cash and cash equivalents are measured at the amount or value of assets that are cash, or those assets that can be converted into cash immediately. So how do we qualify or how do we reconcile it with the definition and recognition criteria for cash and for cash equivalent? Yung sinasabi dyan na amount or value of assets that are cash, we can say na pasok yan dun sa definition ng cash and recognition criteria for cash na unrestricted. As long as the asset is really a cash, then cash yan. Part of cash equivalent. I-measure natin on that amount of cash. On the other hand, yung sinasabing can be converted into cash immediately, we can say pasok dyan sa cash equivalent. Because cash equivalents are, in fact, readily convertible. Okay? And also, example na rin yung mga checks. Okay? Items of checks can be qualified as part of cash and cash equivalents because they are immediately convertible to cash. Okay? Immediate presentment lang dun sa bank, pwede nang maging cash yan. Okay? So yan, yung general measurement, general concept natin for the measurement For cash and cash equivalents, always take note, the amount or value of assets that are cash, that are immediately cash or can be converted into cash. Okay? So to be specific, for cash and cash equivalents, for cash, generally we have it at face value. Okay? Face value is the actual or legal value of the cash. Here in the Philippines, always take note, we are in the Philippine peso. Yung halaga ng piso na meron tayo. Okay? So na example niyan ng face value. Okay, yung example ng face value, manalamin lang tayo. Char, joke lang. Nag-joke si Sir. Pero hindi benta yung joke. Ayan. Yan yung example ng face value or legal value. Okay? For me, legal value is the face value of the item of our cash. So for example, yung 1,000 peso bill na yan. Kung 1,000 yan, talagang legal value niya is 1,000. But, okay, but, there is but. Unless we are in a hyperinflationary economy, or we are experiencing inflation, parang yung value ng 1,000 pwedeng hindi na siya maging 1,000 kung nasa hyperinflationary tayo na economy. Anong ibig sabihin ng hyperinflationary? Mataas ang value ng cash or ng pera natin, and at the same time, mataas din ang mga bilihin. Pero bakit sinasabi ko na hindi na naging equivalent? Example lang ha, we are in a hyperinflationary na economy. Ibig sabihin, mataas yung denomination ng ating pera. So yung 1,000 mataas na yan, pero mataas din yung demand sa market. Yung mga bilihin, tataas. Ganyan. Okay? If we are in a hyperinflationary, yung 1,000 na legal value, hindi na yan magiging equivalent sa bibilihin natin kasi nga matataas na yung pera. Yung tinutukoy ko dyan is the purchasing power of that money. So yung 1,000 natin, kung hyperinflationary economy, parang piso na lang yung equivalent niya. The purchasing power is equivalent to a piso. Parang ganyan. Okay? Example, I am not sure if I can still remember it correctly. Na-search ko to sa isang documentary sa Facebook at sa YouTube. This is a true documentary sa Zimbabwe ata yun, na meron silang hyperinflationary. Yung nangyayari sa pera nila, yung nangyayari sa economy nila, they have printed so much cash. Okay? In fact, mga billionaires and mga trillionaires na sila. Okay? Literally, yung mga bulto-bulto yung pera na meron sila. Nagpakakariton pa yan, nagpakakahon, nagpakabox. Mga billionaires and trillionaires na sila because of the value na nakasaad or sa face value or legal value na nandun sa face ng note or ng pera. But why is it na walang halaga yung kanilang pera? Because nasa hyperinflationary status sila. Okay? Mataas nga yung value ng pera pero mataas din ang value ng bilihin. So parang ibig sabihin, kung nasa Philippine setting yan, yung 1 billion, 1 million, 1 trillion nila is parang equivalent lang sa piso. So for example, yung nabibili natin sa piso, isang piraso ng candy. Kung 1,000 yung gagamitin natin here in the Philippines, maraming candy yan. Kung 1,000 ang gagamitin. But if we are in a hyperinflationary, yung isang piraso ng candy, isang 1,000 ang gagamitin mo to purchase that isang candy. So imagine guys, yung hyperinflationary. But good thing hindi tayo nasa hyperinflationary economy. Good thing pa naman. Wala pa tayo dyan. Ba't nga pala tayo napunta doon? Sa economics yun eh. Ba't tayo napunta doon? Patalastas lang yun. Okay. So yan, yung example ng ating face value, yung 1,000 na yan. So as of today, yung value ng 1,000 ay yung tatak na 1,000 na nandyan, still the value of 1,000 up to now, up to this date. Okay? I hope nagigets ako doon. I hope na nahabol ako doon. Okay? Next, we have naman sa mga foreign deposits. We cannot avoid to encounter entities, lalo na pag naging CPAs na kayo, pag naging accountants na kayo in the future. Okay? Padayon lang sa pangarap, CPA. Okay? Makaka-encounter kayo ng entities na mayroong investment from investment in other countries, like in foreign countries. Usually, naka-foreign deposit yan. Now, how do we measure deposits or investments na nasa foreign banks, foreign entities? Okay? We usually measure it at current exchange rate. Yung current exchange rate, yung meaning yan, it is the rate that we can use to convert that foreign deposit into Philippine peso. Okay? Take note, in PAS 1, sabi dun sa PAS 1, kailangan there is consistency in presentation. In order for us to meet faithful representation and faithful reporting, kailangan lahat ng value in the financial statement paka-Philippine peso. Kaya nga nasa Pilipinas tayo eh. Okay? Kailangan Philippine peso. So how do you do that for foreign deposits? We have it in current exchange rate. Who among you here are familiar with current exchange rates? Or exchange rates na lang? Ay, isa lang. Ay, meron. Meron. Yan. Okay. Para sa iba, not that usually familiar with exchange rate, kung nanonood lang kayo ng news, if you are fond of watching news, the televisions, so hindi kami fan ng news. We're fond of watching K-dramas lang. Animes or mga movies, yun lang. Wala kami sa news. Guys, manood naman kayo minsan ng news para updated kayo sa local affairs ng ating bansa. Okay. Balik tayo doon sa exchange rate. Yung nakikita nyo na running information sa baba, kung nanonood talaga kayo ng news, yung running information sa baba, minsan there is an information related sa exchange rate. Okay? Meron doon related sa exchange rate. Okay? Minsan, it is an US dollar to peso, Japanese won to dollar, Hong Kong dollar to peso, Japanese won to peso, parang ganyan. Or minsan, doon sa screen beside the screen of the reporter, kaya ng sa example, nagsasalita ako. If I am in a news platform, sabi natin na sa TV, yung nasa side ko, nasa ba? Right side or left side, di ko alam. Basta merong portion dyan na may information with the exchange rate. Okay? Yung latest na alam ko for the exchange rate is yung isang US dollar is equivalent sa 50.62 pesos. Or 50 pesos and 62 centavos. Okay? Example ng exchange rate, if you're going to browse or search in the Google, yan. Nandyan. Bakit siya termed as exchange rate? Bakit siya sinabing exchange rate? Because current exchange rate, bakit current exchange rate? Kasi yung exchange rate, they are subject to fluctuation. Minsan naman bababa, minsan naman tataas. The reason for the fluctuation of current exchange rates or of the exchange rates because of market factors. Example na yan sa global market factors, yung naging impact ng pandemic. Okay? Yung naging impact ng pandemic. Another example is civil wars. Okay? Civil wars that affects the pandaigdigang merkado. 'Di ba? Yung oil price natataasan. Yan, 'di ba? Lalo na sa mga Middle East countries, mahirap yung import ng maghihirap sila mag-export, tayo naman na mga user countries, naghihirap tayong mag-import ng gasolina or ng fuel. Yan. Kaya subject to fluctuations yung exchange rates. Yung proper term dyan, dapat current exchange rates. Because the current exchange rate today will not be the same with the current exchange rate tomorrow. Okay? Yung current exchange rate na yan is nasa ano pa? Nasa October 29 ata. October 29 ba nakalagay? Ay, October 29. But, as of today, hindi ko na alam yung updated current exchange rate. Yung current exchange rate na 50.62 pesos noong October 29 will not be the same today, na November 24. Okay? Hindi na the same yan. Okay, next. Next, we have cash deposits in closed banks. Who among you here, kindly raise hand, familiar with bankruptcy? So yan. Familiar ka with bankruptcy. Now, if an entity declares bankruptcy, yung nangyayari guys usually, there are the entity is undergoing receivership or conservationship, or pag hindi na parang hindi na na-sustain yung receivership at saka yung conservationship, yung nangyayari, the bank or other financial institutions or banking entities, they finally undergo liquidation. Ibig sabihin ng liquidation, the assets are being sold and being converted to cash, then binabalik yung mga investments, yung mga deposits ng mga depositors. Okay. How is it related with cash? Okay, lalo na yung closed banks. Now, if an entity have deposits in closed banks, yung nangyayari, we measure those deposits in estimated realizable value. Anong ibig sabihin ng estimated realizable value? Estimated realizable value means the amount recoverable or the recoverable amount out of our investment or deposit from that closed bank. For example, under PDIC, yung PDIC law, sino na yung nakapag-transact with bank dito? Yung nakapag-withdraw sa mga ATM? Or sino man lang yung nautusan na mag-withdraw? Now, okay. So meron naman pala majority. Now, this is a test of being observant. Okay? Observation test. I'm not sure kung na-observe nyo sa monitor ng isang ATM na sinasabi doon that deposits in this bank is insured with PDIC, or deposits, this bank is in partnership with PDIC. Parang ganon. Ay, napapansin kayong ganyan pag nag-withdraw? Wala, sir. Wala kami napapansin ganyan. Basta palsak ng card. Pindot. Withdraw amount. Tanggal ng card. Yun lang. Tingin-tingin, left and right kung merong nakatingin na iba for security purposes. Try nyo lang. Baka in the near future mag-withdraw kayo. Try nyo lang. Tignan nyo muna yung screen, yung monitor. Kung merong information na this bank is in partnership or parang in partnership with PDIC, or parang nakalagay doon, deposits in this bank are insured under PDIC. What is with PDIC? PDIC, sabi dyan, ito yung usually na nakikita, if you are observant lang ha, ito yung makikita nyo sa monitor. Nakalagay dyan, deposits are insured by PDIC up to 500,000 per depositor. Okay? Gawa na lang ako ng simple example. Okay? Meron akong 1 million na deposit in a bank. Okay? An entity have a 1 million deposit in a bank. say that the bank undergone bankruptcy. Okay? They're undergoing also liquidation. They are converting their assets into cash assets. Now, PDIC will insure your deposit up to 500,000. So in one way or another, if that bank cannot pay you back with the entire amount of 1 million, then the PDIC can insure you at least for 500,000. Why did I relate it with estimated realizable value? Because sometimes, hindi na talaga nakaka-recover yung entity from a closed bank. So from that point, 500,000 insurable amount of PDIC could be, hindi ko sinasabing yun talaga yung estimated realizable value, but it could be an estimated realizable value. But further, other than that, hindi ko naman sinasabi na talagang yung amount ng PDIC, yun talaga yung maging estimated realizable value natin. Okay. Yung gagawing reference pa rin natin is yung estimation na promise sa atin ng bank. So for example, again, yung 1 million na yon nasa closed bank. Then the bank declared bankruptcy and they are undergoing liquidation. If the bank promised with certainty that you will be paid at least 700,000, meaning we are expecting from the bank, other than the amount being insured by PDIC, we can receive 700,000. Then that 700,000 is the estimated realizable value. Okay? Now the question, sabi niyo, sir, can the bank promise you to pay to pay back the entire amount of 1 million? Can 1 million be estimated realizable value then? Yes. Okay? What I am pointing out with estimated realizable value is that yung amount ng deposit mo may either be in whole or in part mababayaran or hindi mababayaran. So yung portion na marireturn sa'yo, yun yung maging estimated realizable value natin. Okay? Kung 500,000 lang, equivalent lang sa insurable deposit ng PDIC, yung mapapromise ng bank, so 500,000 lang. If 700,000, then we go with 700,000. But if the bank promises 1 million, the entire deposit na 1 million, then we can have 1 million. So the point is, kailangan tignan yung information as to the estimated realizable value. Okay? Kaya raise hand if nagets ako doon. Okay. So yan, when you have business someday, may advice, lahat ng pera wag lang sa isang bank. Okay? Ganun naman talaga yung financial advisors. Okay? Usually yung mga financial advisors. Though I'm not a financial advisor, yun naman talaga yung i-advise sa inyo if you go with a financial advisor. Yung mga pera hindi yan talaga save in just one bank. Sa ibang banks, pwede din yan. Okay? Evenly distributed. Okay, before I forget, those cash deposits that are in closed banks, okay, ito yung gist hindi na natin yan qualify as part of cash. Okay? If we have cash deposits in closed banks, hindi na natin yan ina-account as part of cash. Okay? Why is that so? Why is that so? Yung cash deposits natin in those closed banks, we usually reclassify it na as receivable. What do you think kaya? Yun yung concept dyan. Hindi na natin yan ginagawang part ng cash, ng cash account. Pag nakikita kayo sa problem solving ng savings deposit or cash deposit na nasa isang closed bank, automatically excluded na yan as part of cash. Excluded na. Okay? Take note of that, I'm emphasizing it. Now, before I forget, let me go back with foreign deposits. With foreign deposits nga pala, if an entity has foreign deposit, the usual accounting for foreign deposits is part of non-current investments. Usually, foreign deposits have restrictions. Okay? If the problem provides for foreign deposits that they have restrictions, then foreign deposits will not be part of our cash account. But if those foreign deposits have no restrictions, wala silang restrictions, then they can be part of our cash. So ito lang titignan for foreign deposit. Hanapin, look for the information sa problem if those foreign deposits have restrictions or no restrictions. If no restrictions, automatically part of cash. If with restrictions, then part of non-current assets. Usually, non-current investments. Okay? So yun ha, na-emphasize ko. Next, for cash equivalents. So for cash equivalents, eto, bagong-bago lang to. Okay? This is very, very new even for me. Because of changes and updates in the accounting standards, okay? Earlier, we have defined cash equivalents are investments. They are in fact investments, but they are not the investment for long-term and other purpose. Ha? Emphasize ko ulit yun. Cash equivalents are investments for short-term cash commitments. Okay? Ano yung sabi ng PFRS 9 naman when it comes to measurement of cash equivalents? I wasn't able to emphasize this one in the previous classes ko kasi nga ngayon ko rin lang to nalaman. Okay? I have searched this one from big firms, okay? Big accounting and auditing firms. Sabi nila doon, okay, cash equivalents, since they are investments, and in fact they have maturity, and also in fact they are financial assets, they are generally measured at amortized cost. So as amortized cost, yan yung value or amount that approximates ng kanyang fair value. Yan. So ganito na lang. For items of cash, be specific tayo generally at face value. But for cash equivalent, we have it at amortized cost. Amortized cost, it is the amount that approximately or estimates the fair value of the cash equivalent. Okay? Bakit ganyan? Bakit approximates the fair value? Bakit estimates the fair value? Because cash equivalents are financial assets with maturity. Okay? Financial assets at amortized costs, they have maturity with an emphasis of insignificant changes in value within the maturity period. So within the maturity period, that approximate value of the cash equivalent is not subject to fluctuations. Okay? Not subject to changes in value. Okay? Kindly raise hand if nakuha ko doon. Okay. So thank you. Medyo mahaba-haba pa. 22 slides pa lang tayo eh. For FS presentation. So for FS presentation, items of cash and cash equivalents shall be presented in the statement of financial position or balance sheet. Okay? If you can still imagine under your FINAC, yung past one, our financial statements, our balance sheet is, or yung statement of financial position is part of financial statements, part of the basic financial statements. Yung structure ng ating statement of financial position divided into three divisions. Divided into three sections. We have section for assets, we have section for liabilities, and we have section for capital or equity. Yung assets, dalawa yan. Current assets and non-current assets. Our cash and cash equivalents are part of current assets. One line item siya. Then yung i-represent natin dun sa one line item na yan is the total combined. Okay? Total or combined total of cash and cash equivalent items. So after identifying the amount of cash, after identifying the amount of cash equivalents, correct amount of cash and cash equivalents, we combine those totals, then that combined total will be presented in the balance sheet in one line item, cash and cash equivalents. Okay? One line item, cash and cash equivalents. Then, the items, the specific items now that composes that one line item will be presented along with the accounting and management policies in accounting for cash and cash equivalents as required disclosures dun sa notes to financial statements. Okay? Take note ha, the combined total part of current assets under one line item, cash and cash equivalent. Then the specific items that composes the combined total of that cash and cash equivalent will be presented as part of the required disclosures in the notes to financial statements along with the accounting and other management policies. Okay? You can still remember the basic financial statements or financial reports. Ano yung, di ba 5 yun? 5 ba? Tama? You can still remember. So name a basic financial statement. Sa chat box, ilagay sa chat box. Wala, nakalimutan na nila yung basic financial statement. O yan, balance sheet or statement of financial position. Ano pa? Income statement. Correct. Actually, income statement is previously termed as statement of financial performance. But as to date, meron na rin siyang other term na profit or loss statement or statement of profit or loss. So income statement previously termed as statement of financial performance or profit or loss. Pero ngayon meron na tayong statement of comprehensive income. Yes, we also have changes in equity. Cash flow statement. O ano pa yung isa? 4 pa lang. Nakakalimutan nila si notes to financial statement. Correct. Notes. Okay? Guys, honestly, if nakakita na kayo ng report, ako nakakita na kasi ako ng financial statement eh. Okay? Soft copy nga lang. Naka-upload. Okay? Maghanap kayo sa Securities and Exchange Commission na website. Meron kasi doong mga ina-upload na financial reports. Okay? Out of the financial reports na sinasubmit ng isang entity, yung pinakamakapal na financial report is the notes to financial statements. Okay? Because of the required disclosures. Baka nga yung balance sheet 1 to 2 pages lang yan. Yung income statement baka isang page lang din yan. Yung cash flow the same, 1 page lang din yan. But yung notes to financial statement, yun yung pinakamakapal na financial report. Try nyo lang i-search sa Securities and Exchange Commission na website. Nasa nasa sec.gov.ph. Okay? So it is almost time Parang napasobra ata tayo. Dapat 1 hour and 13 minutes lang dapat yun. But nonetheless, it's almost time. We'll end lang muna dyan. Wala pa tayo sa problem solving. We'll continue starting with adjustments to cash in the next meeting na lang, which is tomorrow. Tomorrow yung next meeting natin. Okay? In order for us to complete the 6 hours or 3 meetings in a week. Okay? So overview pa lang tayo ha. Expected naman actually na hindi matatapos yung agad-agad the overview because usually I discuss overview in a lengthy period. So yan. By the way, don't forget your attendance. Okay, don't forget your attendance. Okay, so I will stop already the recording para ma-save to.